Here we go. What's going on, everybody? Welcome to Fantasy Football Today, presented by BetMGM, the sportsbook born in Vegas. And we've got a couple of running backs in Vegas that might be pretty interesting to you on the waiver wire this week. We're here to help you get to the fantasy championship. I'm Adam Azer with Dave Richard and Jamie Eisenberg. We got Jerome Ford, 48% rostered, facing a team that has allowed 90 rushing yards or a rushing touchdown to a running back in every single game this season. We've got Kendre Miller maybe getting his chance. Like I mentioned, those running backs for the Raiders and Tajay Spears as well. And it's just funny, Jamie, we've gone through this whole year where waiver wire, running back might have been the weakest position all year on the waiver wire, and it's never a good thing when it's strong, right? It means other guys got hurt, but this could be the week where a waiver wire running back gets you to advance.
It certainly can. You hope you're not having to rely on Jerome Ford or Kendre Miller or one of the Raiders guys. You hope that your backfield is intact. But you mentioned it. David Montgomery goes down for the season with a knee injury. Nick Chubb, for anybody who's been relying on him, out with a foot injury. Alvin Kamara, obviously a big one, dealing with a groin injury. So we have some prominent running backs here that you might have been relying on. And then for some people in deeper leagues, look, Braylon Allen was somebody that might have been an option for you, dealing with a back injury. He may not play. Jaleel McLaughlin dealing with a quad injury. He may not play. So this position is pretty beat up. Kent Walker obviously has missed the last two games as well. You might not have Zach Charbonnet. So you could be trying to cycle through some running backs, or you just may be looking for somebody with a good opportunity and good matchup like a Jerome Ford. So this is an interesting week for that position. But again, you'd rather have your starters and your main guys locked in clearly for the fantasy semifinal.
And it's never a bad idea to have good depth on your fantasy bench. And now more than ever, you might want to pay attention to who you're playing in fantasy. What if you're the lowest seed in your fantasy playoffs? You're taking on the top seed. They were on bye and they just lost David Montgomery and he was a starter for them. They're going to go chase after some of these running backs. You can beat them to the punch. You can get the one that you think will do the best this week. Put them on your bench or maybe even start them. I don't know what your running backs are like, but you can play keep away a little bit from your opponent, and that's always part of the strategy this time of year. Try and make your opponent's team weaker if you can do it. It's rare when that's the circumstance, but it can happen.
Absolutely. I already did all my waiver claims, played a little offense, played a little defense, so that is good advice. Certainly want to do that. And we did have some news before the show started that Dorian Thompson-Robinson is going to start for the Cleveland Browns this week at the Bengals. And we'll talk about how that affects Jerome Ford. But I will tell you that he's made 3 starts in his career last year as a rookie, and he threw for 121, 165, and 134 yards. Jamie's going to tell you why he's nervous about Jerry Jeudy in just a little.
I don't know. I think Falcons fans would take that right now. But other than that, yes, he was terrible last year.
Just how nervous? That's what Jamie will tell you in a little bit. All right, let's talk about. You talked about the Falcons, Dave. I'm going to ask you for your takeaways from the Falcons-Raiders game last night. A doozy, 15-9, the final score. Was this game better or worse than the Thursday night game? They had the same final score, by the way. No, one was 12-6.
One was 12-6. One was 15-9. And I think there were more fantasy success stories than nightmares in this game. But the real nightmare is it's going to be tough to trust anybody in that Falcons passing game. And it might be tough to trust anybody in the Raiders passing game, too, with both of these quarterbacks. Kirk Cousins barely threw. He wasn't very good. Desmond Ridder, 39 pass attempts. You would imagine even on 39 pass attempts, he'd be okay. But he really wasn't. And he didn't even complete a pass to a wide receiver until there was about 6 minutes left in the fourth quarter. So you can't get away from Drake London. You can't get away from Brock Bowers. You shouldn't necessarily get away from Jacoby Myers, but you should lower expectations for those three. It's Darnell Mooney. It's Kyle Pitts. Those are the types of players that I'm going to stay away from. Obviously, the running back in Atlanta, he's not so bad. You're going to continue to start Bijan Robinson. That's expert fantasy advice right there. And we'll talk about the Raiders running backs and whether or not either of those guys can help you a little bit later on.
Yeah, Bijan is obviously the man you would like to see if beggars, not beggars being choosers, but first world problems for fantasy running backs. That's what I meant. You'd like to see more targets. I think it's 2 straight games with 2 or 3 targets and 2 catches. A guy who was routinely getting a lot of catches, but whatever. Obviously, Bijan's the man. Jamie, Minnesota 30 and the Bears 12. Any big takeaways from this game?
I think it was, clearly a disappointing game for Caleb Williams, but another strong game for Keenan Allen. This is now 20 PPR points or more in 3 of his last 4 games. So taking on a Detroit team, which he had over 20 PPR points against in Week 13, you're going to start him this week, especially like Dave alluded to, some of the wide receiver concerns that we have with a Jacoby Myers, with a Darnell Mooney. Keenan Allen's clearly in a better spot than those guys. DJ Moore obviously going to be a starter as well because his targets have been there. I think the interesting thing about this is if DeAndre Swift had the touchdown that counted, taking on a Detroit defense right now that is so beat up, you feel a lot more confident about him, but you should feel some confidence in him, especially if Roschon Johnson stays out with the concussion situation. But for the Vikings, look, you know what you're dealing with here. It's the quarterback is a must-start guy at this point, Sam Darnold. Really going to have a fascinating conversation about where he goes next year if he leaves Minnesota. Jefferson's a must-start guy. I'm still going to start Jordan Addison in this matchup in Week 17 against Seattle. And T.J. Hawkinson really is the one probably disappointing, player for the Vikings at this point. You can't start him. We're going to talk about some tight end streamers for this week. Brenton Strange, Stone Smart, maybe even Chico Okonkwo, just in better spots right now than T.J. Hawkinson, unfortunately.
Yeah, no, it's funny. I didn't even think about that, Jamie, but you have to wonder, Swift had a 1-yard touchdown run called back on a senseless penalty. Would that have even been Swift if Roschon Johnson had been healthy? So that might actually play into people's decisions next week. All right, big topic number 2. Someone you're nervous about starting this week. Jamie, tell me why you're nervous about Jerry Jeudy.
3 words: Dorian Thompson-Robinson. Look, it's not going to be pretty here. This is not a quarterback that is going to have a lot of volume. You figure they're trying to manage the game, maybe lean on their run game a little bit, just not turn the ball over. That's clearly his goal right now. And so these are not updated rankings for me, by the way. So Judy's not going to be in the top 24. I'm really concerned about him without Jameis Winston there. Winston has unlocked Jerry Jeudy. This passing game is going to struggle. Then you have the other wrinkle of maybe Cedric Tillman comes back, so a few more targets going a different direction. Maybe David Njoku plays as well. We got positive reports on him on Monday. So if it's a crowded receiving core with a quarterback that's not going to have a lot of volume, who's had very minimal success, and the one interesting part of this is he's going to run a little bit. The Bengals are actually number 1 in most rushing yards per game allowed to opposing quarterbacks at 30.1. So he could give you a little bit of that with his legs, which could help him if you're talking about an option in Superflex and 2 quarterback leagues. But for the receiving core, for Jerry Jeudy, who's been an absolute stud, he is a number 3 receiver at best, even against the Bengals.
Oh, man. Well, so what about Njoku? If Njoku plays, is he going to be a top 8-ish tight end?
He'll still be a top 12 tight end. I don't know where I'll put him once he's actually able to practice, but he'll be behind Sam Laporta, for example, which hasn't happened very much this season. He'll be in that same group of guys like Brock Bowers, for example, which is not something I thought I'd say from a nervous standpoint, but I'm nervous about Bowers. I'd be nervous about Njoku.
All right, Dave, who are you nervous about in Week 16?
I'm nervous about Breece Hall, who was saved by a touchdown last week. He played just 49% of the snaps. This is supposed to be the lead stud running back for the New York Jets. He didn't play half the snaps last week, and that's including Braylon Allen missing a ton of time in the game. This is just his second game this year with under 10 carries, his only game this year with under 12 touches. The Rams are coming off of a game where they shut down the 49ers. They shut down James Cook the week before. This is an improving run defense. Really, ever since Saquon Barkley went off on them, they've done a good job. And I almost wonder if Aaron Rodgers is just taking everything into his own hands at this point, and that takes opportunities away from Breece Hall, including in the passing game, because Rodgers is looking downfield. He's not going short to Breece Hall. So he makes me nervous. No better than a number 2 fantasy running back, and toward the low end of that number 2 range.
Our colleague Logan Ryan, who does our show on Sundays on CBS Sports HQ, has been saying for weeks, it just appears like Aaron Rodgers, and he's gone back historically on this and says that he just doesn't like throwing to his running backs to take attention away from him. He likes to, make sure his passes are going down the field and throwing to guys that have a little bit more options. I kind of countered that with what he did with Braylon Allen and Isaiah Davis the previous game, or the previous 2 games, previous game where those guys had 11 targets combined. So it could just be maybe his lead running back he doesn't like throwing to, but we haven't seen the numbers in the passing game clearly comparatively to a year ago. And you have to wonder if, just based on the health for Breece Hall, I said this on our podcast, if he has a full week of practice, I'll be much more encouraged by Breece Hall. If he goes through the week again with limited practice or no practice, remember he didn't practice all last week,
right,
then Isaiah Davis is in a very good spot in PPR, over double digits in PPR each of the 2 previous games. He caught a touchdown each of those 2 games. But if Braylon Allen's not there, Breece Hall's struggling, it could be tough to say Breece Hall's a must-start running back.
All right, topic number 3 here. Let's be a little more optimistic. Someone you're excited about starting. And Dave, I will start with you. Who are you excited about starting in Week 16?
It's not a person. It's a team. It's a DST, and it's the Atlanta Falcons DST. And it mostly has to do with the fact that they're taking on the Giants. It's the best matchup for a DST to have this time of year. But this is an improving Falcons defense. We all saw it on Monday night. Since their bye, 13 sacks in 3 games. That's tied for the second most in the National Football League. At least 19 fantasy points in 2 of their past 3 games, including crushing Desmond Ridder on Monday night. And the Giants, 10-plus fantasy points to a DST in 9 of their past 10 games. Here are their past 5 games. This is what they've allowed to a DST. 13, 10, 24, 16, 12. These are all numbers that are absurd for the Falcons DST. They started the year terrible. They had 10 sacks in their first 11 games. Now they're on fire. They're getting to the quarterback. That offensive line for New York is terrible. I can't wait to start the Atlanta Falcons DST in my fantasy semifinal.
Jamie, who are you pumped about? I hope you're as pumped about this player as Dave is about the Atlanta Falcons DST.
I am. It's Bucky Irving. Thank God he got through the back injury and was able to play against the Chargers. And now you're talking about a guy who we were saying has top 10 upside rest of season, had the back injury, scared us. Didn't expect him to do what he did. 15 carries for 117 yards. Now he split work basically evenly with Rachaad White. Bucky Irving's going to be a top 10 running back for me for Week 16. He might be the start of the week. Just looking at the matchup against the Cowboys. I know they did a good job against Chuba Hubbard. But what Liam Cohen has done with this run game has been absolutely phenomenal. Remember, they couldn't run the ball at all last year with Rachaad White, and now Bucky Irving and Rachaad White have looked good in each of the last 2 weeks, really for the majority of the season, and certainly Irving has been much better than Rachaad White at this point. So with what he's done in his rookie campaign, how he's finishing the season, and his matchups to close the season, Irving is going to be a league winner, and I think he's going to have another monster game against Dallas on Sunday night in Week 16.
All right, guys, so now let's spin it ahead to the waiver wire here and our top 3 waiver wire priorities. Jamie, who do you got?
Yeah, I'm going to go with Jerome Ford, number 1. Again, just looking at the situation with Montgomery hurt, Kamara hurt, potentially, replacing Nick Chubb if you have to. We don't know Ken Walker's going to come back. And a good matchup. The Bengals' run defense has been bad for the last 5 weeks. 7 running backs in the last 5 games have gotten to 10.4 PPR points or more. 7. So if he gives you that, that's a flex. If he gives you better than that, we're talking about a number 2 running back. And so since Logan Wilson's injury, they've been absolutely dismal in terms of stopping running backs. You saw last week Tyjae Spears in the passing game. Tony Pollard and Spears both scored rushing touchdowns. So there's an opportunity here for Jerome Ford to maybe play off Dorian Thompson-Robinson and get some opportunities there where they opened up some running lanes. So Ford is number 1. Brenton Strange is number 2. 11 catches last week. That's hard to overlook. And looking at the matchup against the Raiders, number 5 in terms of most fantasy points allowed to opposing tight ends. And then number 3 is really a crapshoot. If you need a receiver, it's Jalen McMillan. You need another running back. You can't get Ford. It's Kendre Miller. You could also look maybe at a quarterback and Aaron Rodgers. If you're going to hold me down to one guy, I'm going to say Kendre Miller just because hopefully he takes advantage of Kamara likely being out and steps up and does some things that Alvin Kamara is capable of doing.
And Dave, your top 3?
I've got the same guy at the top, and I got the same guy at the bottom. It's both the running backs, Ford and Kendre Miller. But I'll put Jalen McMillan second. I've been impressed with what we've seen from him over the last 2 weeks. A 23.6% target per route run rate. That means almost a quarter of the time when he's running a route, Baker Mayfield's throwing it at him. That's a good thing. He's got good speed. He's got good footwork. He has won on a bunch of different routes. He scored touchdowns on a wheel route, on a screen. He's running dig routes. He's doing all the things that a lot of rookie receivers are not doing around the league right now. And I'm ready to start him over slumping wide receivers like DK Metcalf, Marvin Harrison Jr., Calvin Ridley. Like, what am I expecting from those guys at this point that this guy hasn't delivered in the last 2 weeks and should be able to deliver in what might be a high-scoring game in Week 16? So he's going to be second on my list behind Jerome Ford, who's kind of the obvious number 1 guy, Adam.
Yeah, and when we come back, I'll tell you what Jerome Ford did in 3 games with Dorian Thompson-Robinson last year. Will it inspire you to either pick up Ford or maybe go in a different direction and maybe focus on a DST or something like that if you don't need a running back? But we will talk about quarterbacks like Aaron Rodgers, running backs like Alexander Madison when we come back on Fantasy Football Today. Let's talk about running backs and quarterbacks. Just a teaser here with the running backs. Jerome Ford, 3 games last year with Dorian Thompson-Robinson. He scored between 9.5 and 11.9 PPR fantasy points in all 3 games. Had some tough matchups, Baltimore, Pittsburgh, and Denver. But he had 4 or 5 catches in 2 of those 3 games. He's the headliner. We'll talk about him. But first, welcome back to Fantasy Football Today, presented by BetMGM. We got to talk about the quarterbacks here, Jamie, and it starts with Aaron Rodgers amongst the quarterbacks who are, sort of widely available. I know we could maybe put Caleb Williams in the discussion as well. I think he's about 66% rostered, but Rodgers is the head of the class right now.
You're looking at the list here, and it's mostly options for Superflex and 2 quarterback leagues. Desperate situation, you go with Cooper Rush, who's not going to be available in most Superflex and 2 quarterback leagues. But he's got a good matchup against Tampa Bay. He's coming off a 3-touchdown game against the Panthers. I think for Aaron Rodgers, you want to just be a little bit cautious, because while the Rams are number 9 in most fantasy points allowed to opposing quarterbacks, that is factoring in a 55-point game from Josh Allen. You take that game out, and they're probably closer to about 10. That's how good they've been against most opposing quarterbacks. And you look at what they did against Brock Purdy last week. Obviously, weather factored into that. You look a few weeks ago what they did against Jalen Hurts, holding him to 16 fantasy points. This is a good defense. Not a great defense, but obviously the Jets' offense is not that great. I do think they played really well last week against the Jaguars. That was Jacksonville. That was Devontae Adams doing a lot of superhero things, getting wide open, making a lot of great plays. So could he do that this week against the Rams? Absolutely. They're at home. Long road trip for the Rams. A little bit of a sandwich game for the Rams as well, looking ahead to what's left for them in the season with some division matchups. But I still think they'll be able to contain Aaron Rodgers, so just don't get overexcited for really any of these quarterbacks. But if you are desperate in Superflex 2 quarterback leagues, you may not have Geno Smith. You're trying to chase the Derek Carr replacement. Patrick Mahomes, obviously, with the ankle injury. There are some options there that could help you. Mason Rudolph, for example, Carson Wentz. There are some guys that might be able to be some stopgap options or desperation plays, knowing that you are trying to get maybe 15 fantasy points from one of these guys.
Okay, Dave, I'm going to throw a lot of names at you, so I apologize. But I'm just thinking about managers. Well, you know what? I'm not sorry. This is your job, Dave. You suck it up. There are some fantasy managers out there who started Brock Purdy, Matthew Stafford, Tua Tagovailoa, Kyler Murray. And then I'll even throw Bo Nix in there, who's not playing the most inspiring football necessarily. He's playing on Thursday. If I have one of those 5 quarterbacks, am I going to the waiver wire, or am I just sticking with those guys?
I don't mind you going to the waiver wire to add a second quarterback just to give you something to think about over the next week or so, but I wouldn't make a big change here. I think most of these quarterbacks think big picture, think of the matchup. Stafford is a great example. Yeah, he was terrible on Thursday. That's a really good 49ers defense. Their cornerbacks have been playing great. Their pass rush was healthy for the first time in a while, and Stafford kind of felt it, plus the conditions weren't good. But now he's taking on the Jets. They've been terrible against quarterbacks for the better part of the last 6 weeks, so I think Stafford's somebody that I think you can absolutely run back to. I'm a little more hesitant to run back to Tua Tagovailoa, Kyler Murray. At least Kyler's got the good matchup. He's taking on the Panthers. Tua's taking on that 49ers team, and it's at home. Hopefully that offensive line gets healthier, but we don't know if Jalen Waddle's going to play, and we don't know if Tua Tagovailoa is going to melt down again like he did last week. So I might be a little bit more open to adding an Aaron Rodgers, considering Aaron Rodgers or even Cooper Rush over Tua Tagovailoa. For now, I just want to make the move to get one of those quarterbacks just to have the option and to see how the week plays out.
All right. And Jamie, who would be your favorite of the deep 2 QB Superflex leagues?
It would be Mason Rudolph. Again, 19 fantasy points last week in basically a half, stepping in for Will Levis. Obviously, there's no guarantee that he's the starter, so just take that into consideration right now. But if you're the Titans, you should probably give Will Levis a week off and see what happens. And look, Rudolph stepped in for Levis in 3 starts earlier this season. 2 of those games, he was 21 or more fantasy points. So it's a pretty decent matchup against the Colts. Not great, but still, just based on how he's performed, the time of year, Rudolph, could be an opportunity here for Mason Rudolph to help you out from, again, desperation sort of situation.
This is when he shined last year. He shined the week of Christmas. Well, he signed on the 23rd or 4th.
He did not shine in week 17. I lost a fantasy league with Mason Rudolph as my quarterback.
This will be his last chance to start before Christmas. So that's when he shined last year. So I think that's pretty solid advice if you're asking me. Dave, let's take a look at the running backs here. So with Jerome Ford, where do you think you're going to have him ranked? now that we know Dorian Thompson-Robinson will be the quarterback?
He's going to still be a top 24 fantasy running back. You can't ignore somebody who's going to have the type of opportunity that Jerome Ford is going to have. Should be in the neighborhood of 14 touches as a floor. That's usually something that can ticket you into the top 24 at running back. But he is a boom or bust running back. And we saw an example of that as recently as last week when he came in for Nick Chubb. He reeled off, what was it, like a 62-yard touchdown run? And the rest of his runs, he had some decent plays in there, but he is very much a feast or famine type of fantasy running back. And the matchups that you laid out last year with Dorian Thompson-Robinson, I kind of want to throw those out because Thompson-Robinson was a rookie. They were really, really tough matchups. This one is a very easy matchup. We've talked about it a lot. I do think that Jerome Ford can be okay. So with 14 touches, maybe 14 PPR points, might look more like 9 or 10 non-PPR points, and that might even be on the high side of non-PPR. But I think that that's the kind of range that we're looking at with Jerome Ford, and the fact that you can just grab him off the waiver wire and put him into your lineup as a replacement for Kamara, for Montgomery. Maybe you don't have the confidence in Breece Hall. You want to start him instead, just to even have that guy or to keep him away from your opponent so they can't use him. I like that a lot, and I think Ford can be okay.
Oh, man, you don't even know what you said, Dave. You don't even know, but you said something that got me so fired up for Who Has More. Oh, my God. We're going to have the best Who Has More of the year today, folks. About 20 minutes. Don't go anywhere. Jamie, sort out the rest of the pile at running back with Miller, with the Raiders, with Tajay Spears, whoever else I might be forgetting here. Who's next for you?
So Miller would be next. Just the idea of stepping in for Alvin Kamara. We don't know how they'll use Jamal Williams. He is facing his former team. Maybe they give him an opportunity for additional carries. And we have not seen Miller work in the passing game, although that does sort of go with his profile coming into the NFL. Look, there is no Dennis Allen, so there's no hate for Kendre Miller right now. So he should have a chance here for maybe 15 total touches. He did score a touchdown 2 games ago. The Packers' run defense has been good, not great. But obviously this quarterback situation is a mess. We know it's not going to be Derek Carr. So Spencer Rattler most likely starting. It's not the best setup for him, so at best he's a flex option. I do like the opportunity for Amir Abdullah in PPR slightly more than Alexander Madison. Now, it's a great matchup against Jacksonville. We know that they've been bad against running backs for the majority of the season. So Madison may get more chances to carry the ball. But what we've seen from Abdullah in his last 5 games was somebody missing, whether it's been Sincere McCormick getting hurt last night or the absence of both Zamir White and Alexander Madison. He's gotten 3 plus catches in 3 of his last 5 games. He scored 10 plus PPR points in 3 of his last 5 games. So in a game where they could be chasing points, or at least from what we saw last night, where Desmond Ridder not challenging down the field, leaning on some short area targets like Abdullah, he can get an opportunity for maybe 3 to 5 catches, and I think that gives him a slight edge in PPR. In terms of Tajay Spears, he may be the best running back on this list if Tony Pollard doesn't play. That's a big if, because he was able to play last week's game despite not practicing. He's probably going to be limited or miss practice again. But just pick up Spears, as we saw, heavily involved in the passing game with Mason Rudolph. That was fun to see. And if they are chasing points against the Colts, then Spears will be in a great spot. Justice Hill had 4 catches the last time they faced the Steelers, coming off back-to-back games with 4 catches. So an opportunity for him to help you in PPR once again, especially if the Steelers shut down Derrick Henry, which I know we thought that never happened, but the Giants actually shut down Derrick Henry. Maybe the Ravens shut down Derrick Henry. But in any event, Derrick Henry did not have a big game in Week 15. Justice Hill has been very involved in the passing game of late. And then as we talked about with Isaiah Davis, could be involved in the passing game if they're chasing points, especially if Braylon Allen's not there. So there are some guys that are flex options, I think, for the most part. And for Jerome Ford, like Dave said, and I said it at the start of the show, 10.4 PPR points for 7 running backs in the last 5 games against the Bengals. If he hits that number, that's a very strong flex play. So pick up Jerome Ford to potentially start him.
Okay, when we come back, we'll talk about wide receivers and tight ends. Brenton Strange with a big game, better than what we've seen from Evan Ingram lately. Can he keep it going in Week 16? Find out after this. All right, look, we don't have any teams on a bye. We don't have a ton of big-time wide receiver injuries or anything like that. So it's not the most amazing list of wide receivers on the waiver wire, but there's a headliner at the top, and the same thing for tight ends. And you know what? Like I said, I just did my waiver claims before the show. I really like to do that to give some personal experience to it. I put in claims for Strange and McMillan in multiple leagues, so these guys are important players this week. Hopefully they will perform, but they will be important players on the waiver wire. Welcome back, everybody. This is Fantasy Football Today, presented by BetMGM. And Jamie, let's start with the wide receivers. And just how much do you like Jalen McMillan this week? Because he's number one ahead of a couple of Packers, and Tillman is going to, not at all interested now, I assume, with Dorian Thompson-Robinson, but how much do you like McMillan this week?
I think he's worth using as a number 3 receiver. You can't ignore what the targets have been for the last 2 games. So they, leaning on him quite a bit, which is nice to see. So 9 catches, 134 yards, and 3 touchdowns on 13 targets in his past 2 games. This is the guy we thought would step up when Chris Godwin first got hurt against Baltimore. So Mike Evans' absence, Cade Otton's emergence, and McMillan got hurt during that stretch. So now we're finally starting to see a prospect that a lot of people had a lot of excitement for. Knowing that he would be the 3rd receiver in Tampa Bay, you may see that this is the future of the Buccaneers receiving corps. So in keeper leagues, if he's still available and you're out of it, you can still make ad drops. He may be the eventual Mike Evans replacement, or if they allow Godwin to walk as a free agent, he may be the Godwin replacement. With the way Baker Mayfield's playing, if Liam Coleman stays as the offense coordinator, there's a lot to like about what McMillan has showed you. But going into Week 16 against Dallas, we know that this secondary has been beat up at times. Jalen Coker, for example, just had an 83-yard touchdown against this defense. There's an opportunity here for Jalen McMillan to still be very productive and a good number 3 receiver. Dave gave you some names. I totally agree. Better than Calvin Ridley, better than DK Metcalf. You can make a case that just based on the quarterback play, better than Darnell Mooney, for example, better than Jacoby Myers, for example. There's just a lot to like about the situation. It's clearly risky because he is a rookie and only really 2 strong games, but back-to-back strong games for a quarterback that's playing fantastic. I love the setup for Jalen McMillan right now.
Dave, do you like the setup for anyone else on this list?
I mean, you can always try a Packers wide receiver, and Romeo Doubs certainly impressed against Seattle. Did a good job. Took advantage of a nice matchup against Tariq Woolen. He's really starting to fall off a little bit. It is a good opportunity. It's against the Saints, but their weakness is really against the run, and the Packers have become a run-heavy team. And so if I start Doubs, if I start Christian Watson, am I really hoping for a lot of targets? I don't know if I'm going to get it from them. They become touchdown or bust types of wide receivers. Don't mind them if I'm in a pinch at wide receiver or if I need a flex. They're decent depth, but I don't think they can hold a candle to McMillan.
Let's play a game called Would You Start Jalen McMillan Over? And here's how it works. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, would you start Jalen McMillan over Keenan Allen?
No.
I'm not sure of the rules of this game, but I think I'd still go with Keenan Allen, especially in full PPR.
Would you start Jalen McMillan over Rome Odunze?
Yes.
Easy.
Over Jaden Reed?
Yes.
Yes.
Over Malik Neighbors?
No.
I might consider it a non-PPR.
Okay. Over Tyreek Hill?
No.
Not there yet.
Okay. Jamie, how about some deeper league targets for wide receiver?
Jalen Coker, again, no Xavier Leggett, had 6 targets last week in a matchup against the Cardinals. That's not exactly easy, but Bryce Young has clearly been playing better. And Coker, prior to getting hurt, remember that was before Thielen came back, was doing some nice things. So you got to buy into at least what the opportunity might be with Leggett, not expected to play with that groin injury. Tim Patrick's got 15 targets in his last 2 games, 3 touchdowns over that span. They just lost clearly a big piece of this offense with David Montgomery. And so does that put a little bit more on Jared Goff's plate? We love Jahmyr Gibbs. We expect him to do phenomenal things. But if the run game for whatever reason falters, or they are, doubt it, but if they are behind in any games, or they just decide, hey,
they're playing the Bears, they're not going to be behind.
You never know. They decide their defense has been awful. If Jared Goff decides, or if Dan Campbell decides that Jared Goff's going to go out and maybe try and still win the MVP, Tim Patrick, if he's getting 7+ targets against this Bears defense, you'll buy into that in a desperate situation. So there are some guys out there that could help you. You could stash Marquise Brown if the hope of Patrick Mahomes playing in 2 of the next 3 games, in the next 2 games, which have a quick turnaround, so it doesn't seem likely. And how much practice time will he get with Mahomes? But there's a lot of upside there with somebody like Marquise Brown. And then in a very desperate situation, Calvin Austin has scored 10+ PPR points in 3 of his last 4 games. If there is no George Pickens, you anticipate them throwing a lot. Unfortunately, he didn't have a good game against Pittsburgh the first time around, but against Baltimore the first time around. But Pickens played in that game, so he's got 9 targets in his last 2 games.
All right, moving on to tight ends here. Brenton Strange is 5% rostered. He had 11 catches for 73 yards on 12 targets against the Jets on a day where Mac Jones threw 46 passes. Stone Smart, 8% rostered. He's had 2 straight games with 50 yards, and one of those games he was a replacement for Will Dissly. I think Dissly got hurt in the game at the Chiefs. So Smart gets the Broncos on Thursday. Chigo Okonkwo is 4% rostered, 8 catches for 59 yards on 10 targets. Kind of came out of nowhere, and he's facing Cincinnati. And by the way, like that's just a great matchup.
No, he's facing the Colts, but that's also a great matchup. Number 3 in most fantasy points allowed to opposing tight ends.
He just did it. He just did it against Cincinnati. Yes, I apologize for that. So my bad. Okay. Anywho, yeah. So Brenton Strange, Dave. If I have X tight end, I'm dropping him or benching him for Brenton Strange. Give me some big names.
2 names right off the top of the list are going to be Jake Ferguson and Cade Otton. These are 2 guys that fantasy managers at some point in the year came to trust to put up good numbers with high volume, and we've really seen it go away, honestly, with both of them. Maybe Ferguson can still get 6+ targets per game, but I don't see how people can be real confident in starting him. Brenton Strange is not an athletic tight end. He's not somebody that's going to win deep down the field. He's a guy that's going to run 3 yards, 6 yards, 8 yards, turn around. There's the ball, catch it, first down or a short second down. But those points add up. And as long as the Jaguars struggle to run the football, and that's a big if, they're playing Las Vegas. If they struggle, Brenton Strange is going to get another game with a lot of targets and a lot of catches. I would be nervous to use him in non-PPR, but I do want to make this last point on him. 5 games this year without Evan Ingram. In 4 of the 5, at least 9.2 PPR points. Okonkwo is interesting because he had that good opportunity last week, had some good connection with Mason Rudolph. If that continues, obviously he's going to be good for fantasy if it continues. The question is, will it continue? Will this be a game where the Titans have to chase the scoreboard because they fall behind against the Colts? I'm worried that it's going to be a low-scoring game, and that means a low-volume game for both quarterbacks, and that means not a lot of targets for Chico Okonkwo.
Stone Smart going to crack your top 15 this week, guys?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, the tight ends Dave listed, I would start him over Cade Otton at this point. I'd start him over Jake Ferguson. I'd start him over Kyle Pitts. That's easy. So just looking at what Smart has done, in a situation where the Chargers cannot run the ball, and so even though Denver looks like they're going to be somewhat healthy, I don't think Riley Moss is playing, but with Patrick Surtain there. So does he take away most likely Quentin Johnston? You're looking at a situation where Smart in the middle of the field, some chances to make plays. 2 tight ends in the last 5 games have gone off against the Broncos with over 20 PPR points. That's not something I think Smart profiles to do. One of those guys was clearly Travis Kelce. So it's an opportunity here. If he scores, you're talking about 6+ targets. Dave has mentioned that quite a bit over the last few weeks. That 6+ targets is kind of the number you're looking for. If he didn't fumble last week, that would have been a 10 PPR point game. So there's an opportunity here for Stone Smart, as long as Will Dissly's out, to still help you as a low-end number 1 guy.
And those are the tight ends for you to pick up this week. All right, we're going to take a break. Who Has More is coming up. We're all fired up. I'm getting a lot of buzz about who has more. All right, we'll play when we come back on Fantasy Football Today. It is time for America's second favorite fantasy football game show. It is time for Who Has More? And this is, I think, our last Tuesday show of the season. So this is our last Who Has More. Unfortunately, guys, we did not claim the top spot. We are not America's favorite fantasy football game show. That would be Who Does Not Have Less, which I think is basically just a ripoff of Who Has...
Start bench cut kills this show.
Okay, you're right. I wasn't counting that one. That one's like so far ahead. It's like just crushing it in the ratings. Anyway, let's play the game. Who has more PPR fantasy points per game this season? PPR fantasy points per game this season. Brian Robinson Jr. or Rico Dowdle?
Robinson left at least 1 game, so that probably hurts his points per game, unless your A's are statting this. Right. I'm going to say Rico Dowdle.
I'll say Robinson, but I bet it's close.
It is close, and it is Robinson. He has him by 0.6 of a point. Who do you like better this week? God. Brian Robinson or Rico Dowdle? I'll
take Rico Dowdle. I like the matchup against Tampa, but I know the Tampa's defense has played well. You just look at last week. Wow, what a great job they did against the Chargers run game. Chargers run game is awful. I think that the Bucs run defense, I think it's a little overrated right now based on how they've been doing lately. And Dowdle's been hot. 3 straight games with over 100 yards. That's pretty good. He could find the end zone on top of it. That's a number 2 fantasy running back. Easy start over Robinson. Easy start over all the waiver wire running backs too.
Agreed.
All right. Who has more 50-yard games this season?
50.
Brenton Strange. 50-yard games. Brenton Strange Evan Ingram.
Could it possibly be Strange? It would be out of like 5 games.
Strange has 2.
Yeah,
So
Evan Ingram's got to have more. I'll say Ingram.
I'll say Strange.
You're both kind of wrong. Strange actually has 3. Jamie is right in saying Strange. Ingram has 1. So Brenton Strange is. Who has this one? I like this one, right?
All right.
Who has more 60-yard runs in his career? Jerome Ford or the 4 current starting running backs in the NFC North? It would be DeAndre Swift, Josh Jacobs, Jahmyr Gibbs, and Aaron Jones. Who has more 60 or more yards, 60-plus yard runs in his career?
I'll take the NFC North.
I'll take 4 just to be different.
Jamie's always so different. It is the NFC North, 6-3, but that is amazing that Jerome Ford has 3 carries in his career that have gone for more than 60 yards, which is as many as any of those individuals in the NFC North.
Wait a minute, you're saying that combined, Josh Jacobs, Aaron Jones, Jahmyr Gibbs, and who am I missing? DeAndre Swift have only 6 runs of 60-plus yards?
That's a lot of yards.
Rare.
That's a lot of yards, but still.
3 is amazing. I think Gibbs himself has 3. Swift has 0. Jacobs has 2 maybe, and Aaron Jones, that would leave what? I think 1. Oh, Jacobs has 1 and Jones has 2, something like that. But amazing for Ford to have
learned something today.
Who has more PPR fantasy points per game since week 9? This is when Chase Brown became the starter. Who has more points per game, Chase Brown or Josh Jacobs?
That's a close one. Wow.
I think it's Brown. I think Jacobs has a couple of stinkers, and he hasn't been very efficient with his rushing yards. He's scoring a lot. He's not getting a ton of, his YPC is not doing so hot.
I'll say Jacobs just go the other direction.
You don't have to do that, It is Chase Brown, 23 points to 22.1. They are running backs 2 and 3 in that stretch per game behind Saquon Barkley. Okay, so Jamie got the Brenton Strange one. Dave got the NFC North one. Who got the Brian Robinson, Rico Dowdle one?
Dave.
Okay, so Dave's up 3-1, Jamie. Let's go. Who has more PPR fantasy points per game since week 10 when Mac Jones and Cooper Rush became the starters?
Oh, this is going to be
Brian Thomas Jr. or CeeDee Lamb. And there was that Trevor Lawrence game. That counts too. But since week 10, more PPR points per game. BTJ or CDL?
Brian Thomas.
And I'll say CeeDee Lamb.
It is Brian Thomas Jr. by 0.6 of a point.
Wow.
Both between 16 and 17 points per game. All right, Jamie gets the point there. So now we're getting closer here. It's 3-2, Dave. Who has more half PPR points per game for the season?
Okay.
Terry McLaurin or Malik Neighbors?
McLaurin.
Yeah, McLaurin.
Correct, by 0.8 of a point. In full PPR, though, it is Malik Neighbors than McLaurin. Who has more rushing yards the last 4 weeks? Drew Lock, who has made 2 starts, or Devon Achane?
Oh,
Drew
my
Lock.
gosh. I'll say Achane.
It is Drew Lock by 5 yards.
Unbelievable.
Those two runs.
Right?
2 runs were big.
Yeah.
Or 3 runs.
I think we're at 3-3 now.
I think we are. I think it's 4-4.
No, it's 4-3, Dave.
Are you sure? Because you guys
We
tied.
both agreed on neighbors.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So 3-3 or 4-4, whatever. And we have 3 left. Here we go. Who has more of an audience rating on Rotten Tomatoes? Just Friends or Love Actually?
I have no idea.
So you have more, you're better, right?
Yeah, a higher audience score.
Oh, I mean, Just
Not
Friends
critics
should
score.
be Just Friends.
I
Dave, you
don't
wanna
think
guess?
I've even heard of Just Friends. So I'll take
best.
the other movie.
Love Actually, 72% to 71%. Dave takes the lead.
Well, I'm a movie
right.
expert, of course.
You should see Just Friends.
So
Who
good.
has more audience rating on Rotten Tomatoes? Elf or A Christmas Story?
A Christmas Story.
I'll say Elf because it's newer.
JB ties. It is A Christmas Story,
Okay.
80% to 79%. And we have one more left to decide the last edition of who has more audience rating on Rotten Tomatoes. And I'm not saying it's a Christmas movie, but just for fun. Die Hard or Christmas Vacation?
Oh, wow.
Somebody better guess first because you're not allowed to have the same answer.
Christmas
Why
Vacation.
not? I like Christmas Vacation.
All right, fine. Jamie says Christmas Vacation. Dave, what do you think?
Christmas Vacation.
You are both wrong. You're both losers. You stink. You had it there for the win and you choked. Die Hard, 94% approval rating of all these movies. Christmas Vacation, 86%. So I'll give you guys a tie. Congratulations. That was Who Has More, a holiday edition, folks. I hope you all have more holiday cheer this year. Something like that. When we come back, your tweets, your questions on Fantasy Football Today. And welcome back, everybody. Thanks so much for your comments on Twitter and your questions. We're going to help you right now. This is Fantasy Football Today, presented by BetMGM, the sportsbook born in Vegas. Gabriel says, do you trust Ferguson's matchup against the Bucs, or would you drop him for Strange?
I'd like to know the format. If it's full PPR, it's an easy drop for Strange. And I think even in half PPR, I would do it. But in non-PPR, I'd be a little hesitant. I might stick with Ferguson there.
I would go with Strange no matter the format. Ferguson has yet to score a touchdown this season, so I don't think it's going to change in Week 16. Strange should get more targets and probably better opportunities to find the end zone.
All right, next tweet is from David. Colts DST to pick up and replace the Lions. What do you guys think of the Colts DST this week?
I like them better than the Lions, just given the defensive woes right now for Detroit. And look, Caleb Williams, I know he's going to take some sacks, but he has yet to throw an interception in now 8 straight starts. So Colts defense against potentially still Will Levis, I would take that chance.
Well, the Lions will sack Caleb Williams a bunch. It's a close call. I guess I would lean toward the Colts for 2 reasons. Number 1, quarterback situation for Tennessee. Number 2, who do the Colts play in Week 17? The G-Men. So if David wins with the Colts DST this week, he gets to keep them. You use them against the Giants next week. Bam, fantasy championship.
All right, our next tweet. Our next X comes from Patrick. Am I crazy to consider starting Cooper Rush over Kyler Murray?
It's a little crazy. You know, I think if you're just looking at it, Cooper Rush just had 3 touchdowns against his Panthers defense. So Kyler's due. I know he's been struggling, and obviously he has not been the fantasy quarterback we hoped for. But if I'm going into my semifinals, I'm sticking with Kyler Murray if he got me.
I feel like this is the type of move that you're getting a little too cute and you're thinking that you're outsmarting everybody, and it ends up costing you in fantasy. You're right, Jamie. Kyler's due, and he's played okay, just he hasn't had a lot of touchdowns. He can have a lot of touchdowns against Carolina. That could end up being a competitive game, by the way. I would go with Kyler. If you've gotten this far with Kyler, I would stick with him.
I would go with Kyler too, but I don't think it's crazy. Kyler is just not running anymore. And that could always change. But he has 21 or fewer rushing yards in 6 of his last 7 games. So it's not that nutty. And I was going to sing Crazy by Gnarls Barkley, but I can't hit the notes anymore. So you got lucky there, Patrick, and everybody else doesn't have to hear it. Next tweet is from a funny name, Chat GPT Pell Rowan. That's very good. Jaden Daniels or Aaron Rodgers. Heath ranks Aaron Rodgers 3 spots ahead of him. Am I actually considering picking Aaron Rodgers up over Jaden with the Eagles?
This goes right back to what I just said. I think it's too cute to start Aaron Rodgers over someone with the upside of Jaden Daniels. And yeah, it's a tough matchup for Jaden Daniels against Philadelphia. But the way that he's been playing, I want to say like the last 2 games, 2.5 games, it's working for him. It's working for the Commanders. I would stick with Daniels.
Yeah, I would as well. You know, I mean, Aaron Rodgers still has a tough matchup. You know, it's not like he's taking on an easy opponent here. And so just take that into account. And for what it's worth, you know, I mean, Jaden Daniels is still a league winner, so I'm still starting.
Of course.
What a huge game for the Commanders. They get them at home. And he only scored 15.4 fantasy points in the last game against Philadelphia. But since then, he's been 27.6 or more 3 straight games. And from Stuff, Shakir or Devontae Smith in non-PPR.
We know that Dallas Goedert's not coming back, and Devontae Smith has that matchup against the Commanders. I would go with him in non-PPR.
Shakir does have a touchdown in each of his last 2 games, but Devontae Smith still has more touchdown potential, so I would go with him.
Right. More yardage potential, too.
you need to do is just everybody start talking trash about the passing game for the Eagles. If you want Devontae Smith to do well, you just got to talk some trash. By the way, before we sign off here, where do you guys have Lamar Jackson ranked against his nemesis, the Pittsburgh Steelers? He just never does well against.
Still top 5.
Yeah, he's third for me. Steelers, 25 or more fantasy points to 2 of the last 3 quarterbacks that they faced. Jalen Hurts just had a monster game against them. And if there's no TJ Watt, I know it sounds like Watt's got a chance to play, but if there's no TJ Watt, it's a very different matchup.
All right. Thank you to Dave and Jamie. And that is it for Fantasy Football Today. If you need more help, plenty of ways to get that. You can check out the Fantasy Football Today podcast anywhere you listen to podcasts. We've also got great written content for you on cbssports.com/fantasy and more episodes right here at CBS Sports Network tomorrow and Friday at 1 p.m. For Dave and Jamie, I'm Adam. Good luck, everyone. See ya.